Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. And we're super excited to be talking about cyber insurance. And thank you, Nancy, as always, for bringing together the community and making this happen.
You're welcome, Ann. And our guest speakers today are from Fifth Wall. We have Andy Runyon and Wilson Henry. They are the cyber insurance experts, and they are going to be talking to us today about what your insurance company doesn't tell you.
All right, and before we jump in, I just want to, remind people this is such an important topic, and we recommend that all businesses carry cyber insurance. And it's kind of not a question of if, but when. 41% of small businesses had a cyber incident in the past year. So it's almost like you could flip a coin. Is it going to happen to you? Is it not going to happen to you? You can do so much right and still be a victim. So it's really important to dive in and understand this. And just one quick story. We had a local business come to us after they had suffered a cyber incident, and they wanted to do check all the boxes, do everything right after that, because they were completely down for 2 weeks. Employees didn't know if they were going to have a job after this. They didn't know if they had clients. And one thing that they said to us after is that cyber insurance really made the difference between just going out of business and being able to financially recover. So I'm really happy folks have joined us, and take it away, Andy and Wilson.
Well, thank you, Ann. Guys, I'm Andy Runyon with Fifth Wall. I'm our partner risk advisor here, and I have the astute privilege of traveling the country talking about nerdy things like cyber insurance, right? Everybody's favorite. But just a little bit of background on us and Fifth Wall, who we are, what we do. Fifth Wall was founded in 2015. We are the largest and oldest singular cyber insurance wholesaler in the United States, and that means that all we do, our sole focus at Fifth Wall, is on cyber insurance and tech E&O insurance for our partners. And we partner with Miss Ann and Akaru in a manner. Insurance is highly regulated. You have to be licensed in insurance to talk about and advise insurance or advise on insurance. And very regularly these days, with the increase of folks with questions about insurance, the technicalities around applications and things like that, we see businesses turning to their MSP as their trusted technology advisor and asking them questions about insurance. And it's the opinion of Fifth Wall and also legal, right, that those MSPs don't give opinions on insurance. So we fill that gap for Miss Ann and her team. Quickly, before pass it over to Wilson and we talk about the details of policies and some of the meat of what we're going to get at today, just some base statistics to make sure that everybody knows that these are the things that we're going to talk about today are applicable to even the smallest of businesses, right? If you look back at the eCentire report that was published at the beginning of the year, the vast majority of ransomware victims were in the 1 million to 25 million sector, right? We hear regularly, oh, I'm too small to be hit, or this is just for those larger, Fortune 1000 companies. And the statistics, that may have been true pre-COVID, but in the modern era, in the post-COVID world, cybercrime has shifted down significantly to smaller businesses. Another thing within that we talk about quite a bit is how long does it take to get back up? When Miss Ann mentioned that a client or an onboarded client, a new client, said that their insurance made the difference between them staying open and not. You look at things like reputational harm. You look at things like business income, right? The indemnification or payback of that ransom if you have to pay one. How long does it take to get back up and running? And this is a report, another eCentire report published this summer. The average business is going to be down, guys, not for an amount of days, but for an amount of weeks. If you see there, over 70% of businesses had downtime that was somewhere between 1 week and 3 months. So you're talking about being without the ability to operate fully for a long period of time on average. When we look at the actual money that's associated with these events, with the financial loss, this is the most up-to-date data that we have from November of this year, so this month. if you are in a scenario where you have to pay a ransom, and again, FifthWall doesn't, we don't endorse yes or no. It always depends on the situation. But that average ransom payment currently is right around $480,000 roughly. You can see how that number has increased quite a bit since 2018. And then that's just the ransom payment. One of the big misconceptions that we hear, that Wilson hears regularly at the ground level, is that, oh, I would never pay a ransom, so I don't need insurance. Well, guys, if you look at the total value of these claims from the inception of the event to when things are completely and totally finished, this Sophos report here on the right, for businesses that are less than 10 million in revenue, as of 2024, the all-in cost, and we talk about not just the ransom payment, the business income loss, the reputation harm, the fines and penalties, what it costs to bring in forensics and a breach coach, the notification that goes along and it goes out to the affected folks that, you know, their PI or PHI was associated with the breach. That number's running about 1.2 million right now, in average for the smallest of businesses, right? So ransomware can be extremely financially impactful for even the smallest businesses in the country. And then if you want to kind of get just a general high-level view of what we want to cover today, I'm about to pass the baton over to Wilson, let him introduce himself. He's the guy that talks about this stuff on a daily basis at the client level. We're going to cover what is cyber insurance, like and start with a very basic view of what does this cover. And then we're going to juxtapose for you what does bad look like and what does good look like. There is very much, guys that are listening today, there is very much a wide breadth of what's available out there. There is very poor insurance that may check a box. Somebody says, hey, you need $1 million of insurance for this contract. You can go buy $1 million aggregate policy that covers next to nothing, right? And then what does good look like? We'll put those next to each other. We'll talk a little bit about how your cybersecurity posture connects to your policy. And if you choose MFA or if you choose security awareness training, how does that link to your coverages? And then how do I keep from getting a denied claim? There's a lot of talk out in the industry now about insurance not paying out. At FifthWall personally, and again, knock on wood, I always say this with a little bit of hope behind it. We have not had a straight denied claim in over 2 years. So how do we keep from those denials happening? We'll address that there at the end, and that's a constant question out in the wild. So Wilson, pass it over to you. Let's talk a little bit about the basic policy structure.
Sure. Nice to meet everyone. I'm Wilson. I'm our senior cyber risk partner here at FifthWall, dealing with clients, helping businesses think about their risk, what coverage they need, what's a good policy, what's not, helping people review their own coverage, everything that goes into it. I like to say I'm a cyber insurance nerd. So if I get too technical, I apologize, but I'll try to keep it at the high level. So cyber insurance in general is there to protect your network as an organization. Bad actors, financial responsibilities, liabilities that can come from a cyber event. And it can be big and small, right? We've seen claims very low. We've seen claims that were in the millions. So it can be big and small, these attacks, but we want to prevent against that catastrophic event, just like we carry any other insurance, like car insurance, building insurance, prevent against that fire crash. So cyber insurance, just to start from the beginning, cyber insurance is very new and ever changing. It's a baby in insurance terms. It started in the early 2000s, where really little to no companies, except for very large companies, carried it. And then as it grew and more and more companies started getting it, there was going to be a time where things needed to change. And Andy spoke to it a little bit. In 2019, 2020, that's when cyber insurance changed a ton, right? Cyber insurance industry blew up. Carriers lost a lot of money because they were not properly underwriting policies, and a lot of attacks came in. Companies were very vulnerable during the COVID time, and ransomware was really prevalent in 2019 and 2020. So carriers ultimately lost a ton of money based on claims, and they had to change something. A lot of carriers got out of the space. The carriers that stayed in had to change. So underwriting became a thing. They weren't just asking about your revenue, your website, your business. They were actually asking about security controls, exactly what Ikaru does for you. So in that turn, we want to look at your security as well. And security plays a huge part in cyber insurance underwriting. And Andy, can you go to the next slide if you don't mind?
Yeah, for sure.
Perfect. All right. So next one I want to cover before we get into really policy details is the MSP's insurance cover my cyber loss. Well, when I spoke to it, cyber insurance in general protects networks, right? Ikaru carries their own cyber policy, and that does not, go for coverage on your end, right? That's a big misconception in a lot of businesses I talk to. Well, Ikaru handles my security, or my security team handles it for me. They should cover any losses or mistakes. That's not true. Businesses need to have their own cyber insurance policy that's comprehensive, that covers all those aspects that we'll talk about. Ikaru is there to protect the front of the fence, your security team, anything that gets over. Obviously, that needs to be handled correctly by the law, a cyber attack in that direction, but your coverage is needed, and you need to have your own coverage in place to get payouts, to get financial recovery costs that can happen from a cyber insurance policy. So please protect your own liability and make sure you have a policy in place.
And to that point, before we go on to the next slide, at my level, we're starting to see a lot more third parties, right? Government entities, banks require businesses and entities to carry their own limits, right? Most of the time to a minimum of $1 million, but sometimes up to as much as 5 million. We've seen that within the last week. So contractual requirements are starting to highlight this need of, hey, you need to have your own coverage. So good stuff. All right, let's talk about coverage a little bit.
All right, so as you can see, very comprehensive here. And this is an example of a bad coverage. You can see a lot of not included coverages here and different gotchas that you see with carriers. And this can come from many different things. Many different carriers like certain industries, right? We're a wholesaler here at FifthWall. We have access to 50+ carriers. All these carriers like different industries, and that changes all the time. So making sure you're working with a good carrier year over year is key, right? And then again, not a lot of people like reading through their insurance policy. And if an agent struggles with cyber insurance, which a lot of agents do across the country, cyber insurance is very new, very hard to put a good policy in for your risk. These holes can happen, especially if you have an endorsement or rider or small policy. And not a comprehensive policy. You're going to see a lot of these first-party coverages, some third-party coverages not included, definitely crime coverages. But we want to, make sure those gaps are, filled, and it's a fully comprehensive policy. You don't want to be, dealing with a policy like this if an attack happens. So as it's broken up, the aggregate limit of the policy is very important, right? We want to have enough coverage. That's the most the policy will pay out in a term, your year. Usually cyber policies run for a year. That $1 million is the most the policy will pay out. So baseline for small businesses and up nowadays is $1 million. Baseline. We can go below that. There's 500K policies, there's 750K policies for very small businesses, but that baseline is $1 million. And not every business needs $1 million. Some businesses are bigger, right? Have a bigger risk, do different things with different data. They may need 2 million, 3 million. That's something that can be figured out, but we want to put that, correct limits in place. And in general, this policy, comprehensive, but doesn't include everything. We have the third-party coverages, the first-party coverage, and crime coverages. But if you see that little yellow pointer there, it's not explained there, but that business interruption has a co-insurance on it. So you're actually paying for 25% of that business interruption back to the carrier. And that was listed in the policy, but maybe the client never knew about it. And Andy, do you want to expand a little bit on that specific coverage as well? I'll let you talk about that. I know you
Yeah,
love
for
those.
sure. Yeah, no, business interruption is the amount, like is the interruption, is the time that you're down for ransomware. The average ransomware event right now in the country is about 15 days. So it's the business that's lost during that 15 days. And what this policy says is that you're covered for up to $1 million during that 15 days. Now, the caveated part that's stuck in the back of the policy says that that comes with not a $10,000 deductible, but a 25% co-insurance. And what that means is if you were to have $1 million business interruption claim, that you would be on the hook for the first $250,000 or 25%. So whatever that loss is, the insured would be on the hook for the first 25%. And before we go to what good coverage looks like, the other thing that I do want to point out is, guys, crime coverages. Back when Wilson and I started in cyber insurance many moons ago, it was all about ransomware. And we talked about ransomware at the beginning of the call, right, or the beginning of the presentation. Now, today in 2024, ransomware was here back in the day, and these cybercrime claims were here. We're dead even now as far as number of claims submitted. There are just as many crime, theft of funds, invoice manipulation, social engineering claims as there are ransomware claims in 2024. Why is that important? When we talk about bad coverage, one of the most common exclusions on your riders and your non-comprehensive policies is cybercrime, right? So a lot of times those losses are excluded, as you see down here. And then if they are included, there is some electronic theft here that's included, a little sprinkling on there. A lot of times there will be a double or triple or sometimes 5 times the deductible. We saw one submitted this week where the deductible on the policy was $1,000, but the e-crime or the financial, the funds transferred deductible was $10,000, 10 times more than the normal deductible. Those are the things that you want to look for when you're evaluating your policy. So let's look a little bit here about the juxtaposition of bad versus good, right? We just saw what would be a comprehensive policy with all the 3 majors. It checks the box of $1 million, but once you get into it, it doesn't really do what you think that it does, right? So what does that look like juxtaposed against a $1 million across the board policy there, Wilson?
Yep. So as you can see, the $1 million fully comprehensive policy is going to have all those coverages filled, right? We want to see $1 million throughout the third party and first party coverages. And yeah, based on industries, you might have some sub limits, but it's including those coverages that people really don't think about. And with older forms or rider or endorsement forms, you're going to have huge holes, especially in the dependent network interruption, the business interruption, sometimes in the ransomware extortion loss. But the crime coverages, like Andy spoke about, are so prevalent. I know everyone on this email gets those phishing emails or calls or trying to trick you. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. That's the easiest way to get in with a company. These bad actors are casting a big net and trying to catch as many fish as they can. And usually it's just with those little tricky emails that some people miss, or trying to get credentials and trying to get in your system. So having a fully comprehensive policy fills those gaps. Make sure that if any mistakes happen and something happens with your system, that you're covered. So having that comprehensive coverage, those things in place is key. And doing this.
Before we go though,
yeah,
I got a question for you before we go. Now it says here that I'm paying almost $6 grand for this policy that's got all these gaps in it. Well, surely if I fill all those gaps, I'm going to have to pay at least double that, right? Isn't that how this works?
There's a misconception around that too. I mean, in some cases, I don't want to make any promises, but in some cases,
Right.
what we're seeing in the market is there are carriers that will, for instance, on this policy, and this is a real life example, I think I found a policy for $3,500 with taxes and fees. So finding, people with good access, have carriers that know they like your industry, means something, right? There's so many variables when I go out and talk to carriers of, okay, wow, these 2 carriers really like this industry. These carriers are way off in premium. And a lot of companies, year over year, which they'll do with most insurance is, hey, we're just renewing. You know, oh, sorry, we had a premium increase this year. Sorry, it is what it is. Cyber is normally in the back of the mind where it should be, you know, front and center nowadays. And making sure, hey, premium went up or this carrier is non-renewing us. We need to switch carriers. Let's find another one. So having that expertise is key year over year when you're carrying a cyber policy as well. But yes, that 5,900 came way down and we got them more coverage.
And to talk pricing in general, guys, and then we'll move on. But there is a decline in pricing currently, right? We're seeing a softer market than we were 2 years ago. So if you haven't marketed your insurance, and there was this cycle that was going on, right? Cyber insurance premiums went up and up and up, 2020, 21, 22, 23. Entering into 24, the market started to soften a little bit. So if you've been going, just on auto renew, like Wilson mentioned, it's like, oh, guys, sorry, hey, premium went up again 20% this year. We do have some more soft spots in the market in 2024 heading into 2025 than we have in previous years. So yep. Let's talk a little bit about, and you've mentioned this, we've touched on this before, but going back to my point about insurance being regulated, but Akaru is the trusted advisor, right? So a small business or a medium-sized business comes to the Akaru team and they say, hey, my local agent's not really giving me good advice on my policy. Do I have enough? Like, should I buy more? Really, your MSP shouldn't answer that, right? Like that should be left to insurance professionals. So Wilson, when you have somebody that has that question and they go to their trusted advisor and say, hey, do I know if $1 million's enough? How do you address that?
Yep. It's the risk discussion. It's talking about, all right, what are you doing on a daily basis? What industry are you in? How much is if you came into work, and I love posing this question, if you came to work one day and your computers were off, nothing was working, no access to email, phones were down, and internet was not working, and you're calling everyone, what are you going to do that day? How will that affect your business? Will you still be able to do work? Will you still be able to get products out? Will you still be able to see clients? Depends on the industry, but we want to know the cost over time, or every business wants to know the cost over time based on a cyber attack. If you were down for 5 days, how much would that cost you? We can do rough numbers here at Fifth Wall, but this one's based on a $4.2 million revenue floor covering retail store. And different stores have different records and different stores have different revenues, right? But we can get data, rough estimates. Here's your losses, right? I think it's 15 days, just over 1 million. So being down on that time, what's the average, and then what limits can fit into that? If we're looking at 2.2 million over 15 days, well, we should probably look into 3 million limits at least to cover that loss. So absolutely a way to do it and find out what that loss would be based on a ransomware attack. And again, this isn't including all third-party coverages. This is mostly a first-party coverages in a ransomware attack. So you could be extra losses added onto this, but this is a discussion every company should have based on data loss and what could happen if a ransomware event would take place. Am I carrying enough insurance if I have $1 million policy or more?
And I would say over the last couple of years, we've seen a shift. Most folks have, go back 2 or 3 years, most people either didn't have insurance or they had a little 250K rider, right? We're starting to see more $1 million policies, right? Like that's becoming more standard. And I think part of that's driven by contracts. People are asking for people to carry $1 million, right? But go back to that Sophos report. Remember what we said the average loss was for a business sub 10 mil in revenue? It was $1.2 million. So, I mean, even to this, it speaks to the idea that, yesterday's 1 million is becoming today's 2 million as far as the base limit goes. Now, let's talk about like actual, let's kind of the ties that bind here, right? Let's bring Akaru and their staff and their offerings into this deal. How does my cybersecurity posture connect to my policy? Wilson, one of the things that I see a lot of times is small businesses, particularly in the current economy, are very concerned with budget, right? We see a lot of underfunded IT departments. We see a lot of folks that are kind of tight with the purse strings around cybersecurity. investment, right? And they want to make sure that they're getting the most bang for their buck, right? So if I was a small business, small to medium sized business, and I was going to a Akaru to purchase certain controls, do the controls matter? Are certain more important than others? Like, how do those controls in that cybersecurity posture connect to my insurability?
Yeah, awesome question. Different carriers have different applications. Every carrier has their own application. The most question I get is, all right, they're asking all these questions, what really matters? And really that's also based on your size as a business too. The larger the business, the more money that's coming in, depending on the industry, is going to have more security requirements than a smaller business. So knowing that, it depends, but there are, 5 key controls that every company will need to get a cyber policy, or at least get good premium as well. You could still get a policy probably without MFA if you're a small company, but you're going to be paying a heck of a lot more, and you're not protected as well. But multi-factor authorization is one, so that's MFA. That is that extra little text when you're signing into your accounts. There's patching and vulnerability management, patching those vulnerabilities that come through on different systems that you're using, making sure they're keeping those up to date. There's cyber insurance or cybersecurity training for employees. So training your employees. Carriers want to know if your employees are staying up on trends and getting tested, and making sure they can stay away from those bad actors that are trying to get in the system. There's backups, backing up your data, making sure you can get all your data back up and running as quickly as possible. And those backups are protected. We don't want that data to be accessed easily. And then there's this very new one that's a requirement seeping into small businesses. It's the endpoint detection and response, EDR or MDR, managed detection and response. And this is definitely taking security to the next level. And I'm sure Akaru has implemented this over the last few years for a lot of businesses they work with. But this is watching your endpoints and watching for vulnerabilities that are happening within your system. And this can be different setups, but carriers want to have a 24/7 endpoint detection and response in place. And in general, if you think of insurance carriers, this is organized gambling for them. I mean, I like to make that joke, but it really is. They are looking to protect their risks, and asking these questions protects those risks that they want to insure. So year over year, this list is going to grow. It is. They're going to add more and more year over year, and more of these are going to become solid requirements for cyber insurance. And that requirements, I mean, cyber insurance carriers are 2 years behind good security. Always like to say that too. Always catching up and figuring out what works and what protects businesses better and what they want to ask for on these applications.
Very good. And guys, just, I mean, if you hadn't figured it out yet, we've had the choppy water there in the background and kind of the whole restless sea theme. Akaru is really your lighthouse to bring you to shore, right? If FifthWall in the insurance game, if we're sure Akaru is the lighthouse to bring you in, they can get you hooked up with all of the things that you need to become more insurable, to lower your rate, increase your market access, lower your deductibles, right? They'll provide all of those things that are needed. Last thing before we get to the end here, talk about process just a little bit, because I know we're short on time. How do we keep from getting a claim denied, Wilson? Like, I mean, that's something that, I mean, just real quickly there. How does that happen?
The most important thing to do is filling out your application correctly. That's where we see the most claims denied. Whether it's people coming to us or talking about this, or talking to carriers directly, filling out your application correctly and making sure you're keeping those security controls in place throughout the term of the policy. Right now, we're just kind of handing an application back to the carrier, and the carrier says, all right, see you next year. I hope everything's correct on here. If you have an attack, we're going to come in and make sure everything's correct, depending on where that vulnerability started from. But filling out the application correctly, making sure that's all correct, and also making sure on your policy that you have those coverages. Obviously, a claim can get denied pretty quickly if you don't have coverage for ransomware and extortion loss. So that's another way, other than filling out your application correctly and honestly, that a claim can get denied if you never had coverage for that piece previously.
Yeah, no, very good. And I get asked all the time. I mentioned that we haven't had a claim denied in 2 years, and people are like, how can you say that? Well, number one, we walk people through the application. It's a very good application, right? We communicate a full story, hopefully honestly, to the carrier, and then we place comprehensive policies, right? And when you do those things in tandem, it's really, really hard for the carriers to wiggle out of claims. If carriers were just sitting here not paying honest applications with full limits, they would have no reputation to base on. People would stop using them as carriers, right? Before we run, guys, just some base information on our process. If anybody has any questions about their policy or would like a consultation with Wilson, we do an initial discovery meeting. We don't ask a ton of technical questions right out of the gate. We try to kind of meet folks where they are, right, with your Akaru representative and talk through your program and things like that. If you would like to go to the market, we do a digital application. We complete an analysis from there, and then we sit back down with you and the Akaru team, and we walk you through, here are your options and here are our suggestions, right? This little case study here on the right, I won't spend a ton of time on it, but I actually need to update this because I just got their 2024 renewal today, right? This was a hospital that their original quote was $141,000 for $5 million in cyber insurance, right? They didn't have MFA. They didn't have security awareness training. They didn't have an IR plan. So for the first year before they got those things implemented, we had to drop down their limits and raise their deductible just to get them under $100,000. Well, once they put on MFA and they added security awareness training and they got a solid tested IR plan and tabletopped with it, last year we dropped that premium down to $54,000 with a much higher limit and a lower deductible with a full limit for ransomware coverage. We got their renewal today. They'd had a little bit of a dip in revenue, and we figured that out through the application process. Their renewal for 2024 was $36,000. Guys, that is a $105,000 difference from the original quote to where we ended today. Now, there's been some change in revenue, but there's also been some change in controls, right? That is very, very counterintuitive to the narrative that cyber insurance premiums only go up and up and up over the years. So what we would like to do for you guys, kind of as putting a bow on this thing, we're right at 30 minutes. We promised Miss Ann we wouldn't be much longer than that, so we're doing pretty good on time. We would like to offer a complimentary cyber liability review there. Miss Ann, I see you back on. You want to kind of talk about how they can contact Larry and get this information out there?
Yeah, well, hopefully folks in our community know Larry on our team. So if you just call him, he's at our main number, extension 230. He coordinates calendars. You can give some times, and then he'll connect you with Wilson for a really comprehensive review, because we get questions about policies all the time, and we can't fill out a form for anybody. We absolutely cannot sign a form for anybody. We can maybe clarify terminology, but I love, Wilson, that you identified yourself as a cyber insurance nerd, because that's how you can get the real answers. And I think also I'd encourage folks, even if you have a policy and you love it, you may as well just review it, because it doesn't cost you anything. Maybe you find something better, maybe you don't. Maybe you have a favorite agent you like to work with. I highly recommend going through this in depth, because too many people, like from our line of work, we find people who wind up with an unpleasant surprise from time to time.
Yep, sure. I'm very candid with my reviews. If you have an agent that you work with, let me give you some education to take back to them. I mean, it's an easy process. If you have a great policy in place, let me let you know, right? We just want to make sure you're properly covered, and Ann and Nancy care as well, as your helpful, cybersecurity experts.
The term we like to use is, oh, sorry, go ahead, Miss Nancy.
That's okay. I was just going to say my favorite slide was the one you had on the 5 must-have security controls. I just want everyone in our community, prospects, clients, to make sure if you're not using those 5, please call the office. We will help you with that. That's what we're here for.
Yeah. And to that point, and to go off of what Wilson says, we always say we're not going to create fires where there are none, right? If you have a solid policy with a good agent that's cyber aware, stay where you're at. We'll just check your homework for you and put A+ on that thing, right? But if you have a situation where you have a policy that's not up to snuff, you have an agent that's not answering your questions, you've got an MSP that, quite frankly, in 2024 has not, encouraged you to MFA or EDR and link those things to insurability, that's where this process can really help.
Yeah, and I can say we advise everybody. You saw the little questionnaire there, MFA on 365. We are cracking down on that now because we've made it available to everybody. Stay tuned for next week because we're really cracking down on the folks who haven't implemented yet, even though it is available to them. And I had a question, that came in about if somebody's had a cyber incident, can they get in? How will that impact their ability to get insurance for the future?
Very good.
That's a great question, Ann. So if you had a cyber event in the past, it totally depends on what nature of that event is, right? If you had a full-blown ransomware attack and a small little petty crime where 25 grand was missing, totally different situations. But these carriers will ask about it. I have a ton of clients that come to me after an attack and say, Wilson, we did not have a cyber insurance. We need it now. We had an attack 6 months ago. Here's what happened. We need to present it differently to the carriers. Obviously, we got to let them know an event happens. The underwriting is way more in depth than if you didn't have a cyber event, and some carriers won't even insure you if you had a cyber event in the last 2 years. So you can absolutely get it. It's going to be way more expensive, a little bit more expensive, and the underwriting is going to be a little bit more intensive. And we're going to have to give a background on what happened, right? The carriers will want to know what happened. So I hope no one has a cyber event without cyber insurance or had an event in the past, but you can absolutely get cyber insurance now. There's the waiting period as well of you have to notify the carrier, not different applications say in the last 3 years, did you have a cyber event? Some carriers say in the last 5 years, did you have an event? But it's, if you had a cyber event in the past, I would work with an expert to try to get cyber insurance because it's a little bit bigger of a haul to go through underwriting if you've had one in the past.
And they're good to know that there's hope.
Oh yeah, there is.
There is. Yeah, but they're gonna want to know what was going on before and what's going on now. I mean, Miss Ann, you mentioned multi-factor authentication. Let's say you didn't have MFA on and you had a ransomware event. If you go apply and you want coverage moving forward, nobody's going to insure that account without MFA being added, right? Yeah. So it's really going to come down to what was the posture at the time of the event, and then what remediation and what additional steps have been added to make sure that it won't occur again.
Yeah, how you got to prove how you've become a better risk.
Yep.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. We're at the time limit. This is recorded, so if you want to share it with other people on your team, we'll have it. They can just go to the same sign-in page. We're also going to get it up on YouTube. And definitely, if you have any questions at all, Larry will you'll get Wilson and Andy all to yourself to ask whatever questions you'd like. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And please take advantage of getting your questions answered. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.